December 7th, 1941, the day that lives in infamy, created me. You see, my body was not meant to be, but inevitable nonetheless. Born of nation-state dominance, of aftermath of violence, of occupation, born of curiosity, of intrigue, of rebellion, born of desire, born of love, born of hope. My body is America. My body is Japan. My body is Black America. My body is Nikkei America. My body is yellow. My body is black. My body is caramel. My body, with all its complications and contradictions, with all its recriminations and reconciliations, with all of its wonder, my body is inevitable nonetheless. So I want to take a look at the motto by Rika Houston and Mikhail Hogan. And it's called Edge Dancers, a dynamic, fluid agency model, emic agency model, multiracial identity construction. It is an iterative learning model that asserts that the multiracial person engages in understanding throughout their lifetime, revisiting past experience and adapting to new ones, learning upon layer with each iteration and integration of new experiences. But this model is not just about the shifts in understanding about the self or the multiracial person. It also asserts that a multiracial person impacts and influences constituent cultural communities and models to which they belong. It's not static, this model. It is fluid, multidirectional, and a dynamic dance. Again, that impacts at the individual level, the group level, and societal levels. They found that three commonalities existed. The notion of alienation, that most folks of mixed race background, and I would even add sort of third culture children. When they go into a new setting, there's alienation. At the child level, you get bullied. At the adult level, you get shade. So, but the next is the notion of complexity. Long discussion, almost argument I had with Maria Root was about the notion is being mixed hard? And I contend that it's not. Being mixed is. Because if I say that being mixed is hard, then that means being not mixed is easy, and I don't have access to that easiness. The last is celebration. Being mixed in life and as a third culture kid isn't all bad. There's a lot of things, there's things that you give up, there's things that you learn, there's things that you have access to, and there's a great deal can be a great deal of flexibility and openness to lots of new and different ideas. So I want to take a look using this model and start with sort of someone from Japan, Ariana Miyamoto, in 2015. She wins the Miss Japan pageant. And if any of you were here or were around or were sort of engaged in this, Japan at the sort of social level lost its mind. And so Maya Washington took a good look at this, and so she was looking at all the different things that were said in media. She's a communication studies person, so sort of shifting through all that. So when it came out, Miss Japan is not Japanese enough, right? And then to layer it, because she was the first multiracial, but then she was too black to be Japanese. Wasn't that she was mixed, but that she was black and mixed, and that just wasn't cutting it. And so, to the point that she doesn't even look Japanese, right? And then finally, I've included this particular quote because it's from a high schooler, right? Not someone who's 45 or 60 and is in that get off my lawn stage, right? She's not, half is not 100% Japanese. If someone chooses as Miss Japan, both her parents should be Japanese. So it was a really interesting place. One then wonders, well, why'd you do it at all? Knowing that you were going to run up against the anxiety that the society would have, that you were going to be, if you won, you were the first, and as most firsts know, you get beat up quite a bit. And so in one of her interviews, she said that she got involved when one of her friends, a good mixed race friends, died. And the article that I was looking at didn't say how, but there was intimating that the pressure, the social pressures got to that person. And so it motivated her to change Japan, right? And so while I don't say that this is a panacea, and it's wrought with all sorts of other things, so I don't want anyone to get twisted that I said Japan is fully changed. But when Naomi Osaka took the torch, went up the stairs, and represent all of Japan to the world in lighting the Olympic torch, and that same night, Rie Hachimura is the flag bearer, right? Regardless of the reasons for why they did it, and there's certainly critique for why they were chosen, all those other things, I don't want to get into that. For the 5-year-old child who is mixed black and Japanese, for the 6-year-old child who is mixed easy for me to say, black and Japanese, for the 66-year-old black and Japanese, it was a moment of validation. We exist, and even if it had other political implications, we're looking at that notion of that being able to change people at the individual level, to have that sort of impact on the individual level. And in that public debate, sort of those who pushed back against it saying, no, she should represent. And then some global response too, that allowed Japan to rethink its positionality. And when it was going to be in an international global world stage, bringing together all the peoples of the world. And looking at this model of understanding construction of multiracial identity, I'm going to play a little with my own life as a case study. So my parents, as Steve Murphy Shigematsu said, like many in that time, even though many of those who were in charge tried to keep them from coming together, they were young people, and young people, when they come together, they get young people-ish. Such was the case of my parents. As with many at the time, they were married in a civil ceremony, in sort of Japanese civil ceremony that the US government didn't recognize because he could not get permission to marry by his commander. My brother was born, he got permission, which happens so often. If we take a look at the demography, now the social science didn't come out, demography of many of those early families, the first child are often illegitimate in the eyes of the United States government. The parents had to actually actively adopt them to the family once they got married, and then the second, third, or fourth children were born U.S. citizens, were able to use the U.S. military hospitals, et cetera. And that's just exactly what happened with our family. My brother was born a Japanese citizen, had to naturalize and give up his Japanese citizenship when he was about 14. So actually when we headed to Okinawa, that's when I found out about all those different things. And but to understand that it was very different. So I was born here in '57. By '59, we are posted in Fort Riley, Kansas, the very, very middle of the United States. And we moved to Manhattan. And Manhattan is my hometown by default in some ways. It's where I started school. Where I went to high school. And so I started school, was actually on Okinawa in middle school, and then went back and did high school and graduated from high school. And my mom, what they were able to do is to create a really strong and safe environment for me. My mom was really key in this, and she was very active in the Black women's community. The Black women's community was very generous and accepting her back. But creating that space, so the black space for me was never, while there was some alienation that occurred, it was never a place that wasn't safe. And that in large part was because my mom was befriended and adopted by some of the Black matriarch women. But I think it was that interaction between the two. There was an openness that made that happen. When I was 8, my dad, we were about to move to Germany. My mom had gotten an illness and got a very serious infection, and she was placed in the hospital for a year. So they called my dad back. in the Army and his wisdom sent him to Vietnam, and so we were sent to live with my paternal grandparents in North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina. But they were really influential. So for me, being black wasn't about politics, wasn't about other things. It was about historical and lived, and it's about being in that community. We moved to Okinawa after my mom got well, and we were able to. My dad was actually sent to Vietnam. We were in Texas at the time, and then he got posted to Okinawa and went to join him on Okinawa. This is a time when I'm in middle school, so 10, 11, 12, where you start to sort of figure out your own identity and all those sorts of things. And so two things that were important about Okinawa was that I got to see my mom and though she's not from Okinawa, but in a Japanese setting, so where her language was valued, where that wasn't an impediment, where her cultural value, so I got to see her in her element. And that allowed me to be comfortable with that in myself in ways that, while it was always part of the home, now it was important outside the home. And it gave me cultural capital when we were off base with the guys whose families weren't Japanese, and even though I only spoke a little bit, I could still get around and those sorts of things, so you had currency in that way. And for my Japanese friends, when we were on base, we could protect them from issues from being thought as outsiders. And so, but she used her cultural capital in a lot of different ways, and sort of taught me not to sit on my hands either. So one of the things, the second thing that happened on Okinawa was, we're 12, this is around 1969, right? So Black Power movements are going, the Black nationalist movement's huge. People are changing their names from Afro-American to African-American to all, right? So all these different sort of namings. And so we're sitting there, like guys trying to be political pundits and the like. And so I finally said, I wonder what my name would be. And one of the guys from Hawaii looked at me, he goes, I know what you are. And I said, what? He goes, you're Hapa Afro. Now, at one level it's kind of cute and other things, but for me at that time, I had a name. It gave me a name. And so while I won't say I never had issues with being mixed, I had a name to ground me. It gave me, in terms of, if we look at psychology, it solidified my self-concept as mixed. The self-esteem stuff goes up and down, but the concept was rock solid, and that notion of being mixed. And so when I talk to my peers who are also mixed around, something happened in their lives with their families that also helped us to sort of solidify that concept. So while our lives were complex, we also learned to celebrate and understand that we had some tools that were useful. And so within the Japanese American community, the sort of notion of being Hapa was sort of, with the new millennium, became huge. When we look at the outmarriage rate in the Japanese American community, is over 50%. So by the time we get to the late 90s and 80s and 90s, those of us who were mixed before it was hip had been doing the research. So all the studies I talked about previously were all done in the Mount Rushmore and Maria Roots were all done in the 1980s and early 1990s. And we all took to the street and were working them in community organizations, helping people understand their kids and other things like that. Raising a mixed race child required us to do a lot of intentional work. My wife is Sansei, Japanese American. And so nurturing her in general ways, as she's athletic, and so she wanted to do that, but she also in sort of understanding who she was as a young black woman. And so we would send my daughter to Kansas City to hang out with them every summer, so she would be immersed in a strong black community there in Kansas City and understand her blackness from that perspective. She went to Yale and was part of the Black House. She worked for the Black House. She worked for the Asian House, and then she worked for the Black House and other things. And started a mixed club there. And so this is her Kente graduation at Yale. And then she is also part of some cultural learnings in Los Angeles. Fandango Obon is the one that brings together African, Mexican, and Japanese cultures together in a celebration of Obon. But the other part of that notion of creative agency, and so being dynamic and being active and using it as an asset model. And so I've been able to use that in my work in the U.S.-Japan Council, my work with MOFA, and other things. And so I've been able to give talks around Japan and the United States and sort of bring together the two countries and those issues, as well as talking about mixed and third culture things to sort of, and all of them, I talk about this, about us having a different normal, because all the literature always talked about us being abnormal, but we're just different normal. Think of it from this perspective of a 3-year-old. They go to a friend's house where both parents look alike and speak the same language. And in their household, from the time they could hear in utero, they've heard 2 languages. The time they could see, they had parents who did not look alike phenotypically. So when they go to the house where all that, quote, the normal house, their idea is like, what's wrong with this family? Right? So we live a different normal. It's not better, it's not worse, it's simply different. Naomi put it all as George Floyd and the racial unrest, no doubt, but all of us are called to whatever platform we have to use our voice for change. That happens whether you want it to or not, so you might as well grab it and see what you can do more positively. And of course, I want to thank you and my Tokyo Blackanese family from last year's barbecue, and you can recognize a couple of folks up there. And like Black folk anywhere, even though it was raining, the barbecue still went on. Thank you very much.